Imagine working your whole life, saving every dollar, and finally building your dream pool in your own backyard, only to have the HOA show up demanding you hand it over to the neighborhood. And when I refused, Karen actually called the cops on me. But here's the twist: what happened next left her humiliated in front of everyone. It all started with something that I had dreamed about for years: a pool in my own backyard. Not just any pool, but one that I worked for, saved for, and built exactly the way I wanted. The neighborhood where I live has an HOA, and while they manage community areas like the park and sidewalks, I made sure when I bought my house that the backyard was completely my own. No shared spaces, no joint maintenance, nothing that gave the HOA any legal say over it. For me, the pool wasn't just a luxury, it was a personal accomplishment, a symbol of my independence and hard work. Every detail was mine, from the sleek tiles to the lounge chairs set up perfectly for summer afternoons. It was private property in every sense of the word. When the project was finished, my pool became the envy of the street. Neighbors would sometimes peek over the fence to catch a glimpse, and I'd occasionally get friendly comments like, "Wow, that looks amazing," or "Bet it's nice having that in this heat." And honestly, I didn't mind people admiring it. After all, it's human nature to appreciate something nice. But I always made it clear that this wasn't a community feature, it was my backyard, my sanctuary. If I wanted to invite someone over, that was on me. If not, then it stayed private, just the way I intended it. Now, in most neighborhoods, that wouldn't be an issue. But this is where the problem began. You see, HOAs have a reputation for poking their noses where they don't belong, and mine was no different. At first, it was little comments in newsletters about community spirit and shared enjoyment of neighborhood resources. I brushed them off because they didn't apply to me. My pool wasn't built with HOA funds, wasn't on HOA property, and certainly wasn't for shared enjoyment. Still, I had this nagging feeling that someone on the board, someone with an overinflated sense of authority, wasn't going to let it go that easily. And I was right. The moment Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA board, laid eyes on my pool, I could see the wheels turning in her head. She didn't see it as my property or my investment, she saw it as something the neighborhood could use, something she could control. But at this point, I didn't know just how far she was willing to go. For me, the pool was personal freedom. For her, it was an opportunity to impose her will, and that clash of perspectives is what set the stage for everything that followed. Not long after my pool was completed and I had finally started enjoying it, the HOA started showing its true colors. At first, it was subtle, just a few lines slipped into the monthly community email about neighborhood resources and equal access to amenities. I skimmed through it, thinking it was the usual talk about the playground, the walking trail, or the basketball court that the HOA actually managed. But then I noticed the language getting strangely specific, with mentions of newly constructed features within the community and how they should be made available for all residents to enjoy. That's when my eyebrows went up. They weren't talking about public property, they were talking about my pool. I couldn't believe it. I had gone through the hassle of permits, contractors, inspections, and endless expenses. Every penny had come from my pocket. Not 1 cent of HOA money had touched this project. Yet here they were, trying to twist the narrative, making it sound like my pool somehow belonged to everyone just because it existed inside the neighborhood's boundaries. It was absurd, but anyone who has dealt with an overbearing HOA knows this: logic doesn't always matter when someone with a clipboard and a little power decides to overstep. It didn't take long for the gossip to start either. A neighbor mentioned to me in passing, "Hey, I heard the HOA is considering making a pool schedule for the summer. You gonna sign up for a slot?" I nearly choked. A schedule? For my pool? The nerve of these people. That's when I realized it wasn't just Karen thinking this, she had already started whispering to others, planting the idea that my backyard was some kind of community pool waiting to be unlocked. And of course, the ringleader of all this nonsense was Karen herself. She had a reputation in the neighborhood. The type of person who acted like she ran everything, who believed that her position on the HOA board gave her unlimited authority. The truth is, Karen thrived on control. If she saw something nice that wasn't under her jurisdiction, she wanted it to be. She wrapped it up in words like fairness and community spirit, but it was never about that. It was about her ego and her need to dictate how others lived. The more I ignored their emails and subtle hints, the bolder Karen became. To her, my silence was weakness, an opening to push harder. And while I kept thinking common sense would eventually stop this madness, I had no idea she was about to take things to a whole new level. It was a hot Saturday afternoon when the situation escalated from annoying emails to something far more intrusive. I was lounging by the pool, music playing softly, enjoying the peace that comes from knowing the space is completely yours. Then I heard it, the distinct sound of my backyard gate rattling. At first, I thought maybe it was the wind, but then came the knock, sharp and deliberate. When I walked over to check, who do I find? Karen, of course. And she wasn't alone. Two other HOA board members stood behind her, both holding clipboards like they were conducting an official inspection. Karen greeted me with a smile that was anything but friendly. "Good afternoon," she said in that tone people use when they're pretending to be polite but are really trying to bulldoze you. "We're here on behalf of the HOA to review the new pool and discuss how we can set up a fair schedule for neighborhood families to use it." I was stunned for a second, then almost laughed in her face. "Excuse me? This is my private pool. There's no schedule. There's no review. It's on my property." I gestured around the yard, making it as obvious as I could that this wasn't some shared facility. One of the clipboard guys tried to chime in, flipping through papers like he had authority. "Well, you see, since the pool is located within the neighborhood boundary, technically the HOA has jurisdiction over its use." I cut him off immediately. "No, it doesn't. I have the property deed, I have the permits, and I paid for every inch of this. This pool is mine, and the HOA has zero claim to it." Karen's fake smile dropped in an instant. Her face turned red, and her voice went sharp. "You're being incredibly selfish. This kind of attitude is exactly what ruins community spirit. Do you really think it's fair to keep such a resource to yourself when families here could benefit from it?" I couldn't believe the entitlement dripping from her words. "Fair?" I shot back. "What's fair is that I worked, saved, and paid for this. If you or anyone else wanted a pool, you could have done the same. But you don't get to come into my yard and tell me how to use what's mine." The tension hung in the air. Karen glared at me like she wasn't used to people standing up to her. She muttered something under her breath, spun around, and stormed off with her clipboard crew in tow. I thought that would be the end of it, but little did I know, Karen wasn't finished. In fact, she was only just getting started. After Karen's little ambush at my gate, I knew I had to make my stance crystal clear. If I gave even the slightest hint of hesitation, she'd twist it into an opening to push harder. So when she and her clipboard crew tried to frame the pool as some community resource, I didn't hold back. I planted my feet, looked her straight in the eye, and said, "No. This pool is not shared property. It's mine. End of discussion." They weren't expecting me to be so firm. One of the board members nervously shuffled his papers, clearly realizing this wasn't going to be the easy victory they had planned. But Karen, being Karen, wasn't about to back down. She raised her voice, trying to intimidate me. "If you continue to deny the community fair access, we will have no choice but to escalate this issue legally through the HOA." That's when I decided to shut this nonsense down completely. I walked back into the house, grabbed the folder I had kept since the pool construction was finalized, and returned with the paperwork in hand. I opened it up right there in front of them, the deed to my property, the building permits, and the inspection approvals. I pointed to the official signatures and seals. "See this? Every part of this pool was approved as a private residential addition. Not community, not HOA managed. You have zero jurisdiction." Karen's eyes flickered, and for the first time, I could see the crack in her confidence. The board members leaned in to glance at the documents, and one of them actually looked embarrassed. He muttered, "Well, I suppose if it's on your deed," but Karen shot him a glare sharp enough to cut glass, silencing him instantly. Still, I wasn't done. I continued, "You need to understand something. Just because this pool is visible from outside the fence doesn't make it community property. Just because you want control doesn't mean you get it. You're not entitled to what I paid for. For a moment, there was silence. Karen's face was flushed with anger, but she couldn't refute a single thing I'd shown her. She huffed, crossed her arms, and snapped, "This isn't over. You'll hear from us again." With that, she spun around and stormed off, dragging the reluctant board members behind her. As the gate slammed shut, I felt a mix of frustration and relief. I had proven my point and drawn a line in the sand. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't the type to lick her wounds quietly. If anything, my refusal had just thrown fuel on her fire. And sure enough, the very next move she made would take the whole situation to a level I never saw coming. The moment Karen realized she couldn't win the argument on the spot, her mask of fake politeness completely slipped away. Her voice, which had been sharp already, turned into outright yelling. She jabbed her finger toward my pool like she owned it, as if pointing hard enough might magically make it hers. "You're being ridiculous," she shouted. "Do you honestly expect the neighborhood to just sit by while you hog this? People are talking, and you're making yourself look bad." I stood there, calm but firm. "Karen, I don't care who's talking. They can gossip all they want. At the end of the day, this is still my pool. Nothing you say changes that." That calmness seemed to push her over the edge even more. She hated not being in control, hated that her intimidation tactics weren't working on me. Her face went red, her hands were shaking, and for a moment I thought she was actually going to barge past me and try to step into my yard. I had to plant my hand on the gate and block it to make sure she didn't. One of the board members tried to intervene, mumbling, "Maybe we should, revisit this later," but Karen snapped at him too. "No. This is exactly the problem. People like him think they can ignore the rules, and it ruins everything for the rest of us." Her words were dripping with entitlement. To her, my private pool wasn't just mine, it was some imaginary HOA possession she felt entitled to control. I could almost see the gears spinning in her head, calculating how to twist this into a power play. Finally, after realizing she wasn't going to bully me into submission, she let out a dramatic sigh, rolled her eyes, and spat out the words, "Fine. If you want to be selfish, be selfish. But this isn't over. Trust me, you'll regret this." With that, she spun on her heel, nearly knocking the clipboard out of one of the board members' hands as she stormed away. Her footsteps pounded against the pavement as if each one was a warning shot. The two men followed behind awkwardly, glancing back at me like they didn't sign up for this kind of drama but were too scared to go against her. As the gate clicked shut, I thought maybe that was the last of it, that Karen had gotten her little tantrum out of her system. But the way she had glared at me before leaving told me otherwise. She wasn't done. She was planning her next move. And little did I know, her next move would involve something much bigger than HOA threats, something that could drag in the police. A couple of hours after Karen's dramatic exit, I thought the whole ordeal was behind me. I stretched out by the pool again, trying to relax, but there was this nagging feeling in my gut. The way she had glared at me, the way she had promised "this isn't over," it didn't sit right. Karen wasn't the type to lick her wounds quietly. She was the type to plot her revenge. Still, even I didn't expect her to go as far as she did. The first sign was the sound of sirens in the distance. At first, I didn't think much of it, maybe there had been an accident nearby. But then the flashing lights turned onto my street, and my stomach dropped. Two police cruisers rolled up slowly and parked right in front of my house. My neighbors began peeking through their curtains, some even stepping outside to see what was happening. Within seconds, I was the center of attention, and I hadn't done a thing wrong. I walked to the front yard, confused but calm. Two officers stepped out of their cars, and one of them asked, "Sir, are you the homeowner?" "Yes," I answered. "What seems to be the problem?" The officer exchanged a quick glance with his partner before saying, "We received a call about a disturbance involving refusal of access to shared property. The caller claimed you were denying members of the Homeowners Association access to the pool." I couldn't help it, I actually laughed. Shared property? Officers, this is my private pool. There's nothing shared about it. And then, right on cue, I saw her. Karen was standing across the street with her arms crossed, a smug look plastered on her face as if she had already won. She wasn't embarrassed, wasn't even hiding, she wanted everyone to see this, wanted the whole neighborhood to believe she had the law on her side. I took a deep breath and said, "Would you gentlemen like to see the paperwork?" They nodded, and I went inside to grab the same folder I had shown Karen earlier. This time, I laid it out carefully for the officers: property deed, building permits, inspection approvals. Everything clearly marked the pool as a private residential addition. The officers reviewed it silently, flipping through page after page. When they were done, one of them looked at me with a small nod, then turned toward Karen. What came next wiped the smug grin right off her face. The silence stretched for a few moments as the officers finished looking over my paperwork. I stood calmly, arms crossed, while Karen shifted restlessly across the street. Her smug confidence was starting to crack. Finally, one of the officers cleared his throat and said, "Ma'am, this documentation is pretty clear. The pool is on his private property. It's not listed as community or HOA managed in any capacity." Karen's face froze like she'd just been slapped with reality. But of course, she wasn't ready to give up. She marched forward, waving her hands dramatically. No, you don't understand. The neighborhood has always shared resources. Just because his fence is around it doesn't mean it shouldn't belong to all of us. It's unfair that one person gets to hog something so big while everyone else suffers in the heat. The officer held up his hand, cutting her off. His tone was calm but firm. "Ma'am, fairness isn't the issue here. Property rights are. According to these documents, this pool is entirely his. That means he decides who uses it. The HOA can't force him to share it, and neither can you." I couldn't help but glance at Karen with a small, satisfied smile. She looked furious, her cheeks bright red, her eyes darting between me and the officers like she was searching for some loophole to cling to. But there was nothing left. The law was on my side, plain and simple. Karen tried one last desperate attempt, her voice rising with fake outrage. "But officers, he's dividing the community. He's ruining the spirit of this neighborhood. If people see that he can keep this all to himself, others will start ignoring HOA rules too." The second officer, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. His voice was even sharper than his partner's. "Ma'am, this isn't about HOA rules. This is private property. If you or anyone else continues to harass him over it, you could be facing legal consequences. Do you understand?" That line hit her like a ton of bricks. For the first time, Karen actually went quiet. She stood there, lips pressed tight, fuming but unable to argue back. She had dragged the cops into this thinking they'd back her up, but instead, the whole plan had backfired spectacularly. I exhaled slowly, the tension leaving my chest. My property rights had been defended in front of the entire neighborhood. The truth was out, and Karen's little power trip had just been crushed in the most public way possible. The moment the officer warned Karen about harassment, the air shifted. It was like the entire neighborhood, many of whom had gathered outside to watch, suddenly realized this wasn't my problem, it was Karen's. She had called the cops expecting a victory parade, but instead, she was the one standing there looking like a fool. Karen's jaw tightened, and she tried to recover with a weak laugh. "Oh, come on, officers. Harassment? Really? I'm just trying to make sure the community is treated fairly." But her voice cracked, betraying the fact that she wasn't as confident as she wanted to seem. The officer didn't budge. "Ma'am, fairness doesn't give you the right to trespass, make demands, or misuse police resources. If this happens again, you could be cited. Let me be clear, this is private property. You're not entitled to it." That line hit her harder than anything else. For a split second, I thought she might argue again, but the second officer stepped in, crossing his arms. "Ma'am, I strongly suggest you head home now before this situation escalates further." The crowd that had gathered was whispering now. A couple of neighbors even gave me discreet thumbs-ups, clearly tired of Karen's antics. She thrived on control, but at that moment, she had none. And she knew it. Karen finally spun around, but not before throwing me one last venomous glare. It was the kind of look that said, "This isn't over," even though everyone could see it clearly was. She stomped away, muttering about how ridiculous this all was and how the officers just didn't understand the rules. But no one was buying it anymore. As she disappeared down the street, the officers turned back to me. One of them gave a small shrug and said, "Sorry you had to deal with this. You're in the clear. Just call us if she tries pulling something like this again." I thanked them, and when the cruisers pulled away, I finally let myself relax. The whole thing had been surreal. Cops called over a pool that wasn't even up for debate. But the best part wasn't just that I had one. It was that Karen had lost publicly, in front of everyone she had been trying to impress. Her reputation as the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA had just taken a massive hit, and for once, she was the one being put in her place. The moment the officer warned Karen about harassment, the air shifted. It was like the entire neighborhood, many of whom had gathered outside to watch, suddenly realized this wasn't my problem, it was Karen's. She had called the cops expecting a victory parade, but instead, she was the one standing there looking like a fool. Karen's jaw tightened, and she tried to recover with a weak laugh. "Oh, come on, officers. Harassment? Really? I'm just trying to make sure the community is treated fairly." But her voice cracked, betraying the fact that she wasn't as confident as she wanted to seem. The officer didn't budge. "Ma'am, fairness doesn't give you the right to trespass, make demands, or misuse police resources. If this happens again, you could be cited. Let me be clear, this is private property. You're not entitled to it." That line hit her harder than anything else. For a split second, I thought she might argue again, but the second officer stepped in, crossing his arms. "Ma'am, I strongly suggest you head home now before this situation escalates further." The crowd that had gathered was whispering now. A couple of neighbors even gave me discreet thumbs-ups, clearly tired of Karen's antics. She thrived on control, but at that moment, she had none. And she knew it. Karen finally spun around, but not before throwing me one last venomous glare. It was the kind of look that said, "This isn't over," even though everyone could see it clearly was. She stomped away, muttering about how ridiculous this all was and how the officers just didn't understand the rules. But no one was buying it anymore. As she disappeared down the street, the officers turned back to me. One of them gave a small shrug and said, "Sorry you had to deal with this. You're in the clear. Just call us if she tries pulling something like this again." I thanked them, and when the cruisers pulled away, I finally let myself relax. The whole thing had been surreal. Cops called over a pool that wasn't even up for debate. But the best part wasn't just that I had one. It was that Karen had lost publicly, in front of everyone she had been trying to impress. Her reputation as the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA had just taken a massive hit, and for once, she was the one being put in her place.